In the winter of 1943, German infantry units advancing through the forests near Leningrad began reporting something unusual. Patrols were returning incomplete. Officers were vanishing. Machine gun crews were being silenced before firing a single burst. At first, command assumed Soviet artillery or young sniper teams were responsible. That was normal. The Eastern Front was already a killing field. But then came the details. The shots were too patient, too deliberate, too controlled. German soldiers reported waiting, sometimes for hours before daring to move again. When they did, someone always fell first, often the one giving orders. By the time counter-sniper teams were deployed, it was already too late. They were not facing a reckless youth or a desperate conscript. They were facing someone who did not rush, someone who did not tremble, someone who had lived long enough to understand waiting. What German intelligence never realized, what made this fear so complete, was that the sniper hunting them was older than most of the men she was killing. Her name was Nina Pavlovna Petrova. She was already in her 50s, and she had come to war not to prove herself, but to finish it. Nina Petrova was not born into a world of tanks and trenches. She grew up in an era when wars were still fought by marching armies, when rifles were slow, and when survival depended more on endurance than speed. She witnessed the collapse of Imperial Russia, the chaos of revolution, and the brutal civil war that followed. By the time the Soviet Union stabilized, Petrova had already lived through more upheaval than most soldiers would ever experience. She became a physical education instructor, a profession built on discipline and control. She believed deeply in structure, training the body to obey the mind. Strength mattered, but restraint mattered more. Marksmanship entered her life not as a military ambition, but as a discipline. She practiced shooting the way others practiced mathematics, patiently, methodically, endlessly refining small movements. Her focus was not aggression, it was precision. By the late 1930s, Petrova was already an exceptional shooter, but no one imagined she would ever use those skills in combat. Or education. She refused. Not emotionally, not dramatically, she simply refused to accept that age disqualified her from duty. When she volunteered, officers initially dismissed her. She did not fit their image of a frontline sniper. She was older than some of the men giving her orders. But Petrova persisted. She demonstrated her shooting ability, her physical conditioning, her understanding of tactics. Eventually, command reached a compromise. She would be allowed to serve, but not as a frontline sniper. She would train others. Assigned to sniper training units, Petrova quickly established herself as more than an instructor. She was relentless. She taught recruits to lie still for hours, to control breathing even under simulated artillery fire, to understand terrain not as scenery but as protection. Many of her students were young women barely in their 20s. They called her calm, exacting, unshakable. She did not teach hatred, she taught responsibility. Every shot, she insisted, carried consequence. As casualties mounted and experienced shooters became scarce, commanders began making exceptions. Petrova was given permission to deploy forward, not permanently, but enough to test whether her skills translated under fire. They did. Her first days at the front were not dramatic. There were no charges, no speeches. She observed. She learned how German units moved, where officers positioned themselves, how machine gunners exposed themselves during setup. When she fired, it was never rushed. Her first confirmed kills were clean and efficient. No wasted motion, no second guessing. The reports began circulating quietly. An older woman sniper, unusually effective, exceptionally disciplined. She was reassigned, not back to the rear, but deeper into combat zones. As Petrova accumulated experience, something became clear. Her age was not a weakness, it was an advantage. Younger snipers sometimes rushed shots, sometimes chased kills. Petrova never did. She waited longer, observed more carefully, selected targets that mattered most. German officers began falling first. Machine gun crews were neutralized before advancing units could respond. She fought not to impress, but to dismantle. At the same time, she continued training others. She fought during the day, taught at night. Some of the snipers she trained would later become legends themselves. By the time Petrova's early combat record was officially compiled, her kill count was already significant. More importantly, her students were producing results. German forces were no longer facing isolated snipers, they were facing a system Petrova helped build. This was no longer about proving an older woman could fight. It was about reshaping the battlefield. And this was only the beginning. As Soviet forces pushed forward and the war consumed entire regions, Nina Petrova would be deployed more aggressively, fighting in harsher terrain against increasingly alert enemies, while her influence spread through the ranks of newly trained snipers. Her rifle would claim more lives, her students would multiply her impact, and the legend of the elderly sniper would begin to haunt German soldiers across the Eastern Front. When Nina Petrova was assigned more consistently to frontline sectors, there was no ceremony, no announcement, no recognition, just orders, coordinates, and cold ground. She arrived at positions already exhausted by fighting, units that had lost commanders, snipers, and machine gunners to constant pressure. These were not elite formations anymore. They were survivors. Petrova did not try to dominate them with authority. She observed. She watched how soldiers moved when shells landed nearby, how they exposed themselves when they thought no one was watching, how fear changed posture, breathing, judgment. Only after understanding the rhythm of the front did she take her position. Her early missions were reconnaissance-heavy. Petrova was tasked with identifying enemy firing positions, observing patrol routes, and eliminating high-value targets when opportunity allowed. These were not kill-focused assignments. They were about control. She crawled forward slowly, often alone. Snow soaked through clothing, hands numbed, breath fogged the scope. She learned quickly that German units in her sector favored predictability. Officers stood where visibility was best. Machine gunners rushed setup under pressure. Snipers relied on speed rather than patience. Petrova exploited this. Her first confirmed kill during these missions was an officer directing movement from behind cover he believed was safe. One shot, no movement afterward. German units stalled. That pause, those minutes of hesitation, saved Soviet lives. Word spread after her first engagements, not loudly, not officially, but snipers noticed patterns. German counter-snipers were deployed after several successful Soviet actions in her sector. These were experienced men, trained to hunt shooters, not infantry. Petrova knew what that meant. She slowed down even further. For hours she did not fire. She waited. The duel did not begin with gunfire. It began with stillness. Petrova watched a patch of terrain that made no sense tactically, but felt wrong. A shadow that lingered too long. A shape that did not belong. She waited another hour, then another. When the German sniper finally shifted position, Petrova fired. One shot. The duel ended before it began. This was not luck, it was experience. Reports began to accumulate. Clean kills, high-value targets, minimal ammunition expenditure. Commanders who had doubted her age stopped questioning it. Instead, they began requesting her. Petrova was reassigned repeatedly, not because she was expendable, but because she was effective. Each new sector brought new challenges: urban ruins, forested approaches, frozen fields with no cover. She adapted every time. By the time her early combat record was officially logged, Petrova had accumulated a confirmed kill count that would have impressed even younger snipers. But the numbers told only part of the story. Her kills disrupted attacks, delayed advances, forced enemy units to dig in prematurely. German soldiers began avoiding exposed movement in areas she covered, even when artillery support was available. Fear spreads faster than bullets. Petrova understood this. She used it. Unlike many snipers, Petrova never separated combat from instruction. When new shooters arrived at the front, she took time to observe them. She corrected grip, adjusted breathing, repositioned hides. She demonstrated patience, not from textbooks, but from experience. Some of the soldiers she trained during this period would later surpass dozens of kills themselves. They carried her methods forward. Her influence multiplied. German countermeasures intensified. More patrols, better camouflage, coordinated sniper sweeps. Petrova adjusted again. She changed firing times, used decoy positions, fired less but with greater effect. Every mission increased pressure. Every success brought retaliation. But Petrova did not retreat. She adapted. At some point during this phase of the war, Petrova stopped being viewed as an anomaly. She was no longer the older woman sniper. She was simply a sniper, a reliable one, a feared one. Her early missions had proven something critical, not just about her skill, but about endurance. She did not burn out. She did not rush. She did not break. As the front expanded and Soviet forces pushed deeper into contested territory, Nina Petrova would be assigned to increasingly dangerous operations, missions where survival itself was uncertain. Her kill count would rise sharply. Her students would begin operating independently, and her role would shift from effective sniper to something far more dangerous to the enemy, a force multiplier. By the time Nina Petrova entered the middle phase of her combat service, the war around her had changed. The chaos of the early invasion had hardened into something colder, more methodical. Both sides had learned, both sides had adapted. Casual mistakes were rarer now and far more costly. This was no longer a battlefield where luck decided survival. It was a battlefield ruled by experience, and Petrova had more of it than almost anyone around her. Petrova was no longer operating on relatively stable defensive lines. She was now assigned to sectors where movement itself was dangerous, zones constantly probed by German infantry, artillery observers, and sniper teams. These were areas where Soviet units struggled to hold ground. Commanders requested Petrova not just to kill, but to stabilize. Her missions now involved neutralizing officers before coordinated attacks, eliminating enemy snipers before breakthroughs, suppressing machine gun positions during infantry advances. She often moved ahead of friendly lines, sometimes with only one observer or none at all. Each mission increased the risk. Petrova understood something many younger snipers did not. Killing alone was not enough. The enemy had to feel hunted. She deliberately targeted leadership figures first: officers, NCOs, runners, anyone whose absence would cause confusion. Units struck by her fire hesitated longer,
argued more, advanced slower. German soldiers began scanning tree lines obsessively. Movement stalled, momentum broke. Petrova had learned how to paralyze without firing continuously. German command responded aggressively. Experienced counter-sniper teams were deployed with explicit orders: locate and eliminate the Soviet sniper causing repeated disruptions. Petrova was aware of this. She adjusted immediately. She rotated firing positions constantly. She used false hides. She allowed entire patrols to pass without firing. Sometimes she waited days for a single shot. These duels were no longer about marksmanship alone. They were about endurance. Petrova trusted one thing completely: her ability to wait longer than her enemy. Time after time, German snipers exposed themselves first. Time after time, Petrova ended the duel with a single round. It was during this phase that Petrova's confirmed kills increased rapidly. But the numbers again failed to capture the reality. German units began rerouting rather than advancing through areas she controlled. This was not coincidence. This was fear.
Even as missions intensified, Petrova continued training new snipers directly at the front, not in classrooms, in combat zones. She corrected mistakes in real time. She demonstrated patience under shelling. She taught students how to survive mentally, not just physically. Her trainees began scoring confirmed kills of their own. Entire sniper teams emerged carrying Petrova's methods. German forces were no longer facing a single marksman. They were facing a doctrine. German intelligence failed repeatedly to profile Petrova correctly. They expected a young, aggressive shooter. They did not anticipate someone who never rushed shots, rarely fired twice from the same position, abandoned opportunities if conditions weren't perfect. Her age brought restraint. Restraint brought survival. Survival brought lethality. At some point during this period, Petrova stopped being rotated like other snipers. Commanders resisted pulling her back. She was requested specifically not because of morale, but because operations succeeded more often when she was present. Her role expanded beyond combat. She advised units on terrain control. She helped identify sniper deployment zones. She influenced how entire sectors were defended, all while continuing to fight. Petrova never sought recognition. She did not speak of her kills. She did not exaggerate her impact, but reports accumulated. Her name appeared repeatedly in after-action summaries. Her students credited her quietly. Her enemies feared her unknowingly. As the war moved toward its final, bloodiest phases, Nina Petrova would be pushed even further into operations where survival odds narrowed and losses mounted. Her kill count would surpass what anyone had expected. Her influence would reach its peak, and the risks she accepted would finally catch up with her. By the time Nina Petrova entered what would become the final phase of her combat service, the Eastern Front had transformed into something almost unrecognizable. This was no longer a war of movement. It was a war of annihilation. Entire villages disappeared between reports. Forests were shredded by artillery. The ground itself was layered with the remnants of months of fighting. Survival now depended less on courage and more on discipline. Petrova thrived in this environment, not because it was easier, but because it demanded exactly what she possessed. Petrova was now sent to sectors with one clear pattern: they were collapsing. Units here suffered heavy casualties. Officers rotated constantly. Snipers were killed as fast as they arrived. These were the places commanders avoided reinforcing unless absolutely necessary, and these were the places Petrova was requested. Her task was no longer just to kill. It was to stabilize chaos. She entered positions where German pressure was relentless, where patrols probed daily and counter-sniper fire never fully stopped. She did not rush into these zones, she studied them. Unlike earlier phases of the war, Petrova now operated under near-constant threat. German counter-sniper teams were active, coordinated, and aggressive. Artillery was used specifically to flush out firing positions. Observation aircraft monitored movement. Every shot Petrova fired risked immediate retaliation. She adopted again. She fired fewer rounds per mission. She changed positions constantly. She used terrain features others ignored. Shadows, debris, subtle elevation changes. Sometimes she moved without firing at all, simply to map enemy behavior. Her kills during this phase were fewer per engagement, but far more decisive. Each one disrupted ongoing operations. It was during this period that Petrova's confirmed kill count passed what many frontline snipers never reached in an entire career. But again, the number itself was not the true measure. German assaults stalled repeatedly in sectors she controlled. Officers delayed advances, infantry spread out, reducing momentum. Sniper teams hesitated to expose themselves. Fear had become operational. Petrova understood that a sniper's greatest weapon was not accuracy, but uncertainty. Though she never formally commanded units, Petrova began functioning as an unofficial authority. Younger snipers deferred to her judgment. Infantry listened when she advised routes or timing. Officers consulted her before committing forces. She never raised her voice. She did not argue. She explained. Her authority came from survival. Years of strain accumulated. Cold exposure, sleep deprivation, constant vigilance. Petrova felt it, but did not slow. Her endurance, built over decades of discipline, carried her through conditions that broke younger soldiers. She remained methodical, calm, focused. But by now, Petrova had trained and influenced dozens of snipers. Her methods had spread far beyond her immediate unit. She had become something rare, a veteran of veterans. But war does not negotiate with experience, and it does not pause for legends. As the final operations of her service approached, Nina Petrova would face the same reality as every soldier before her. No amount of skill could guarantee survival. Her legacy was already secured, her impact already undeniable. What remained was the final chapter. Identify threats before they could organize, neutralize key targets during advances, support younger snipers operating under extreme pressure. She was no longer just a shooter, she was a stabilizing presence in chaos. In May 1945, only days before the war in Europe officially ended, Nina Petrova was moving with her unit through a newly captured area. The fighting here was sporadic but dangerous. Enemy resistance had not fully collapsed. Small groups still fired from concealed positions. Artillery strikes were unpredictable. Petrova was traveling between positions, exposed but cautiously. Then she survived years of frontline combat, counter-sniper operations, relentless pressure. But war does not spare the disciplined. It simply waits. By the time of her death, Nina Petrova's confirmed kill count exceeded 100. But that number alone fails to explain her impact. She trained dozens of snipers directly. Many of them went on to record high kill counts of their own. Her methods became standard practice in sniper instruction units. Her influence extended far beyond her own rifle. Entire sectors benefited from techniques she taught. Her legacy multiplied. Petrova was posthumously recognized for her service and bravery, but she never became a symbol in the way younger snipers sometimes did. There were no grand propaganda campaigns built around her, and perhaps that was fitting. She had never sought attention. She had sought effectiveness. Nina Petrova's story challenges almost every assumption about war, that youth equals strength, that speed equals skill, that experience fades with age. She proved the opposite. Her patience killed faster than haste. Her restraint outlasted aggression. Her discipline turned age into a weapon. German soldiers never knew who she was, but they felt her presence. They hesitated. They slowed. They died. History often remembers war through generals and battles, but wars are decided by individuals who control moments. Nina Petrova controlled moments. She decided when men advanced, when they stopped, when they never moved again. And she did it quietly. When the war ended, the world moved on quickly. But somewhere along the Eastern Front, in forests torn apart by artillery and silence, the imprint of Nina Petrova remained, not as a myth, not as a symbol, but as proof that discipline, patience, and resolve can shape history, regardless of age. She was not the sniper they expected. She was the sniper they could not stop.